Good evening, everyone, and welcome. I'm Lenore DeVore, editor of The Ledger here in Lakeland, and your moderator for tonight's discussion on Amendment 2. We'd like to thank you for taking time from your schedules to learn about this amendment. Following a 4-day series by reporter Gary White, The Ledger is hosting this forum to explore Amendment 2, a proposed constitutional amendment that will be on the ballot in November 4th. It requires a yes vote from 60% of the voters to become law. Before moving on, I'd like to introduce the Ledger Media Group publisher, Kevin Drake, and Daryl Ward, the principal at Harrison School for the Arts. If you'd both stand up. Mr. Ward, we'd like to thank you for allowing us to use this beautiful venue tonight to help educate the public. It's really a perfect use for this school auditorium, and we are very grateful for your partnership. We understand that people have strongly held opinions about Amendment 2, and the topic of medical marijuana can generate intense emotions. We ask that you remain courteous and respectful as you hear opinions about Amendment 2 that might differ from your own. Our panelists have driven from around the state, and they have invested a lot of time to provide you with the information tonight. And despite what some TV stations have said all day long, this is not a debate. This is an educational forum. And we also strongly discourage heckling. And we do have people here, Ledger employees, who will ask uniformed officers to remove anyone who is disruptive. We'd also like to ask you to hold your applause this evening until the very end. We have a lot of information to get through, and that will just help speed us along. So in planning this forum, which we've been working on for many, many months, the Ledger solicited questions from our readers. We received more than we will likely get through tonight, so our editors chose the ones that were most relevant, trying to seek a balance between those skeptical about Amendment 2 and those favoring it. The format tonight does not allow for questions from the audience. So let's get started. I would like to thank our panelists who will present a range of views on Amendment 2 and what the consequences would be if passed. I will now introduce them briefly in the order in which they will speak. And I'm going to ask Mr. Ben Polera to come up and do opening comments in John Morgan's place until he gets here. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and do the introductions. Okay, John Morgan is the founder and managing partner of Morgan & Morgan, a law firm with offices in the state of Florida and several other states. Mr. Morgan is a graduate of the University of Florida College of Law in 1983 and founded his firm 5 years later. He led the successful effort to gather signatures for a petition to have Amendment 2 placed on the ballot. He serves as chairman of United for Care, an organization leading the campaign for passage of Amendment 2. Grady Judd has been sheriff of Polk County since 2004 and has been a member of the agency since 1972. He is the immediate past president of the Florida Sheriff's Association. Sheriff Judd is a leading spokesman for the Don't Let Florida Go to Pot coalition, which is campaigning against Amendment 2. He has a master's degree in criminal justice from Rollins College and has completed training with the FBI and other organizations. Next, we have Irvin Rosenfeld, who was diagnosed at age 10 with a rare bone disorder that causes pain and puts him at risk of tumors. He discovered in 1971 that marijuana provided relief from his symptoms, and he successfully appealed to the Food and Drug Administration to join the Compassionate Care Case Investigation of New Drug program. Since 1982, the federal government has provided him with monthly supplies of marijuana. Mr. Rosenfeld works as a stockbroker in Fort Lauderdale and is the author of the book, My Medicine. Dr. Sergio Cione is a physician with a family practice in Lakeland. He earned his medical degrees in the Dominican Republic and did residencies at St. Catherine's Hospital in Kenosha, Wisconsin, and at Alton Ochsner Medical Foundation in New Orleans. He has been licensed to practice in Florida since 1999. He is a past president of the Polk County Medical Association and is now on its board of trustees. Next, we have Dr. Jeffrey Redout, who is a licensed clinical neuropsychologist based in Winter Haven with more than 25 years' experience. He has a doctorate from Syracuse University. He is president of the psychology division of the medical section at Winter Haven Hospital. Dr. Redout has appeared on the Dr. Phil Show as a guest therapist, and he has taught for several universities and is currently on the faculty of Capella University. And our last speaker today will be Dr. Jessica Spencer, who is a certified prevention and addictions professional with 16 years experience in the field of substance abuse prevention. Dr. Spencer earned her doctorate in education in organizational leadership from Nova Southeastern University. She recently took a leave of absence from the Manatee County Substance Abuse Coalition, where she was project director, to become statewide coalition director for the Vote No on 2 campaign. Once again, thank you all for coming. Each of the panelists will be giving 5 minutes to make an opening statement. We will then ask questions submitted in advance by ledger readers. Finally, each member will be given 2 minutes to make a closing statement. Once again, this forum is to educate the public. It's not a debate. So I'm switching things up a little bit as we wait for Mr. Morgan. Mr. Rosenfeld, the floor is yours.
Again, the moderator asked not to applaud. It does take time, although I do appreciate it. Anyway, my name is Irvin Rosenfeld, and in 1963, at age 10, I was diagnosed with multiple congenital cartilaginous exostosis, which means bone tumors on the end of most long bones of the body that can grow outwardly, can cause hemorrhaging, which would be a clot could break off, go to my heart, my brain, my lungs, kill me. So I had many dangerous operations during my teenage years, and was prescribed all the major pharmaceutical drugs, from Dilaudid synthetic morphine to Lioresal to you name it, sleeping pills, muscle relaxants. I took it all. And I wanted to try college. I grew up in Southern Virginia. I was a homebound student in Southern Virginia. They wouldn't let me go to public school because I was hurting myself, and they were scared if I hurt myself on school grounds, I'd sue the school system. So I wanted to try college. I came down to Miami. And during my high school years, I was an advocate against illegal drugs. Why would a healthy person use illegal drugs? In my book, I say I invented the DARE program. I'd be in front of assemblies, I'd hold up my prescription bottles in a plastic bag and say, be thankful you're healthy. Don't do illegal drugs. So I wanted to try college. I came to Miami for the warm climate, and I was in an apartment complex with all students. We'd be outside swimming, and they'd go, let's go drink some wine and smoke some pot. Well, I wasn't going to do that. I had morphine, I had Quaalude, I had Valium. I'm not going to break the law, okay? So I didn't. And after 30 days, I realized I wasn't making any friends because I was not using marijuana. I would not try it. It didn't seem to be harming the kids, so I decided to give in to peer pressure for the first time in my life, and I tried it. And it was pure garbage. Didn't do anything to me. Didn't get high, didn't do anything. But I was accepted, so I was happy. About the 10th time I did, I was playing a game of chess, and I hate chess. And I had sat for 30 minutes till I lost. And it was the first time in 5 years I'd sat for more than 10 minutes. Normally I'd sit for 10 minutes and stand for 10 minutes. And I thought, in what way did I take all the narcotics and drugs that I had to allow me to sit for the first time in 5 years? And it dawned on me I hadn't taken a pill for 6 hours. Well, then how can I sit? And just then the person sitting beside me handed me the joint. And I, looked at it, and I thought, this is garbage. But this was the only thing I was doing, this garbage. So I contacted my orthopedic surgeon in Virginia who knew me since age 10 and asked him, was there any medical benefit of medical cannabis? He said, I don't know, contact your family. Now, my great uncle at one point was head of pediatrics at Johns Hopkins. My regular uncle taught pediatrics at Yale. My sister was head of nuclear medicine at Duke. So I contacted them and told them what happened. I was able to sit for the first time, and all I did was smoke garbage called marijuana. I don't get high off of it or anything like that, but apparently it's helping me medically. And guess what? We found that it is true. This was a legal medicine in this country from 1850 to 1937. manufactured by Merck, Eli Lilly, all the major pharmaceutical companies, mostly in tincture form, okay, used for many different disorders, but prevalently for muscle relaxant, anti-inflammatory, and for pain. I went, voila, that must be what it's doing for me. I got to experiment with this. So that's what I did. I bought it, okay, I broke the law and bought marijuana, and I'd use it for 3 weeks and get miraculously better. My intake of harmful narcotics decreased by 60, 70, 80%. But I was in Florida, so maybe it was the warm weather of Miami that was making me feel better, so I stopped using it. And then after 1 week, I went downhill, I did it again. I did this 3 times. And at this point in my college, people were getting busted. And I wasn't a criminal, I was a patient. But yet, I was at risk of getting arrested. So I decided I was going to, the federal government who's the one that outlawed it, they have their own government farm in Mississippi, been there since 1968. And so if the federal government was the one to outlaw it, the federal government should be the one to supply it. So I went back to Virginia and I took on the federal government. It was a 10-year struggle. I had University of Virginia Law School behind me, I had the state of Virginia behind me, I had the state police, and luckily I was able to get hearings before FDA, and I won those hearings in October of 1982. And ever since November of 82, the federal government, your tax money, and I would say a show of hands, who pays federal taxes in here? Well, I want to thank each and every one of you for paying for my medicine for the last 32 years. Now, 32 years, think about that, 32 years. Well, it's not a medicine. We have no long-term studies that show it's a medicine. We need long-term studies. Well, folks, here I am, okay? I've used 10 joints a day for 32 years, and I've smoked for 43 years. Again, my lung capacity is 108% of normal, okay? I'm a stockbroker. I handle a lot of money on a daily basis. I'm in very good health considering somebody who has a severe bone disorder. I haven't taken any narcotics or any kind of drugs forever. So what I'm here to say is this. This is not the stereo people make it out to be. The lies that people have been telling you that at first it made you lethargic or it made black people go after white women or vice versa, this was all hysteria that people put into it to make it. I'm living proof. Here I am, folks, okay, and I'm probably the only one on the panel that's ever actually used marijuana. So I'm just want to say I appreciate everybody coming out tonight, and that I hope everybody will learn and make an educated decision on this. Thank you very much.
Speaking next is Dr. Sergio Cione.
Well, you know, I was born in Miami, and I'm glad Miami helped you. And there was a lot of marijuana in Miami in the late 1970s and early 80s. But I'm going to talk a little bit about the medical effects of marijuana. So it's very common. It's the most commonly illegally used drug in the United States and in the world. 160 million people in the world use it. That's about 4% of the Earth's population. The active ingredient, as most of you know, is THC. Okay, THC, it stands for tetrahydrocannabinoids, and in the late 1960s, the amount of THC in a marijuana cigarette, okay, or a joint was about 1 to 5%. Now it's a little more than that. Now it's closer to 10 to 15%. And the reason is people that grow marijuana have become very innovative, they've become very good at it, they've increased the amount of THC in marijuana. So marijuana cigarettes now are much more potent than the marijuana cigarettes that were used in the 1970s. So what are some of the effects of marijuana? Marijuana certainly has medical effects, okay? It distorts your sense of time. Things seem faster than what they really are. It alters your spatial perception of things. It impairs short-term memory. It impairs your attention span. It impairs your ability to assess risks. It impairs cognitive function. And the cognitive function impairment only lasts a few hours after you inhale it. Unfortunately, the motor impairments can last up to 24 hours. So what happens is the mood-altering characteristics of the drug and the cognitive function impairment of the drug wears off in a few hours, but the motor function, your dexterity, your skills, still remain impaired for almost 24 hours later, okay? There are over 400 different types of compounds in the average marijuana cigarette. And about 20 to 50% is rapidly absorbed in the lungs if you smoke it, okay? Marijuana has 300% more tar than tobacco. It has about 50% more carcinogens, It's more easily deposited in the lungs, more easily absorbed than tobacco. It irritates the airways, causes increased phlegm and sputum production, causes wheezing, shortness of breath. If you have asthma, it'll make your asthma worse. It'll make your cystic fibrosis work if you have cystic fibrosis, okay? And in just about anybody who smokes, really anything, but particularly marijuana and cigarettes, okay, you have chronic inflammatory changes in the lungs, okay? And despite what you read, marijuana does increase the risk of lung cancer. It does increase the risk of bladder cancer, okay? It also shrinks your brain. There are cannabinoid receptors. There are cannabinoid receptors in the, well, no, this is true. There are cannabinoid receptors in the amygdala and the hippocampus. And what happens is when you have constant attachment of this drug on the receptors, the normal physiologic response is to downregulate these receptors. So what happens is this part of the brain shrinks. And the amygdala is sort of a very primitive portion of the brain, and it controls emotions and other things, okay? So about 10% of the people who smoke marijuana will become addicted to it, okay? And marijuana also, this is for the college students, decrease your testosterone levels, they decrease your libido, they cause gynecomastia, which is breast enlargement in men, okay? They decrease sperm count, they increase gum disease, okay? The French study, which essentially came out in April of 2014, studied the use of marijuana, and they found that it contributed to coronary artery disease and heart disease, which is sort of a new finding. And you're going to hear people compare marijuana to alcohol and say, well, you know, we have legalized alcohol, why can't we have legalized marijuana? Well, the problem is this is not a true analogy, okay? So about 10,000 people die a year in alcohol-related automobile accidents, okay? About 4,000 people die from heroin overdose. So should we legalize heroin? Because it's apparently safer, okay? Less people die from cocaine than from alcohol, so we should legalize cocaine, and cocaine absolutely has some medical benefits. I used to use cocaine in the early 90s in Wisconsin. Not personally, but for patients. It's an excellent topical anesthetic, and it controls bleeding. Okay, so should we legalize cocaine? No. Marijuana is a crude delivery of THC, and it delivers very harmful substances. Smoke marijuana should generally not be recommended for medical use, and that's from the Institute of Medicine report. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Okay, next up we have Dr. Jeff Redout. We're actually keeping with our order, but we'll round up with Ms. Spencer, and then Mr. Morgan and Sheriff Judd. So, all yours.
Am I going? Yeah, I'm going. I guess so. Everybody take a deep breath. Try to open your minds. How many people out there think that they're going to learn something tonight that is going to change their opinion? Really, I'm glad to see that there are a few people that raise their hands. I hope that some things said up here tonight will reach some people. I am officially a neutral person on this. I'm going to try to present the science. And the science is kind of tricky because what you'll find is that science says that some things that support medical marijuana being used, and science also says some things that you really got to watch out because there are some downsides to it. It is not without risk. But medicine is not about things having no risk. It's about weighing risks and benefits. One of the problems with marijuana is the Schedule I status. And the AMA has been very firm on saying it has no business being on Schedule I, along with heroin and other drugs. Schedule II is things like methamphetamine. There are some people in a recent neurology journal that have said maybe it should be on Schedule III with Vicodin and codeine. You know, because it has some risks. It does have some risk of dependency, but it does have some benefits too. So what kinds of risks and benefits does it have? Some of the main risks are for the developing brain. This is where you have with adolescents, there have been many studies recently that have said, well, it could probably cost you some IQ points. It could. Regular use in adolescents with the developing brain does seem to be very, very bad for the developing brain. People who begin to use in adolescence are much more likely to become dependent on it, are much more likely to have problems with it, and are much more likely to have lasting problems throughout their life because of it. Doesn't happen with everybody. You know, we have to weigh these things, but it does happen with a large percentage. And so, you know, certainly anything, you know, when people say, well, we don't want it to get in the hands of our teenagers, they're absolutely right about that. On the other side, we have, you know, what kind of benefits does it have? There are a lot of studies done mainly in other countries, but also in this country. Other countries don't have the Schedule I status that the U.S. has. And so what do they find? They find, well, it's very helpful for a lot of neuropathic pain, kind of like Mr. Rosenfeld has. It's better than placebo for HIV, for cachexis, which is the wasting in HIV and AIDS. It's very good for what's called CINV, the cancer-induced nausea and vomiting. It is better than placebo for reducing spasticity in multiple sclerosis. And it's helpful in a number of other conditions, including rheumatoid arthritis. It's been implicated in cancer patients with anorexia, and cancer patients with nausea and emesis. Is it the first-line medication that you should go for in these cases? Maybe not. A lot of these studies have been done with people who are treatment resistant because not everybody responds well to narcotics, which is very often the main thing that is used. The thing that you want to also talk about here is why smoke it. And the real reason for that at this point, I mean, you know, it drives doctors crazy because you're right, smoking marijuana, smoking anything is not really good for your lungs, it's not really good for you. Although there has never been a case of lung cancer or emphysema attributable to smoking. That's from a paper that was presented before the Drug Enforcement Administration in 2005. There have been, the main reason to smoke it is because people can titrate their own dose better. It's immediately bioavailable. When you take it internally, like Marinol or Casomet, it has to go through the gut, and so you lose some of that bioavailability. It's not as easy to know when the dose is going to kick in or not, and the line there between taking more than you want to take and taking less than you want to take, it's much harder to judge. That's why people smoke it. It's a little bit better if you use vaporization, but there's still things that go into the lungs. I want to tell you a little bit about scientific evidence. You know, one of the things that we worry about here is that you have to be careful of what are called anecdotal evidence. Anecdotal evidence is things like, well, I don't believe cigarettes are bad because my aunt smoked 2 packs a day and she lived till 90. So that means that cigarettes are really okay, right? That's why we want to do more studies. We want to have studies, and absolutely, Dr. Sion and others up here are going to say, you know, why don't we have more and bigger studies like we do for a lot of other drugs that are FDA approved? And the reason is mainly the Schedule I. The other thing that you want to watch out for is correlation. Correlation is when two things happen together. Correlation does not mean causation. You know, my alarm clock goes off at 6 a.m. every morning, and within an hour, the sun goes up. I wonder if my alarm clock causes the sun to go up. You know, we have seen some studies that say that in states that have legalized medical marijuana, I need to stop, don't I? States that have legalized medical marijuana, suicides in men age 20 to 39 fell. Is that because they legalized medical marijuana? I don't know. Some people will say, yes, that's exactly, I would like that to be true, but that doesn't make it true. There are studies that say that traffic fatalities have fallen in states that legalize medical marijuana. Why should that be true? Is that because they legalize medical marijuana? Don't know. More studies are needed. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Wyatt. Next up, we have Dr. Jessica Spencer.
Good evening. I am really excited to be here with all of you guys. Some of you I've never met before, so this is wonderful. A little bit about myself. I did leave my job actually to work on this campaign because I've been in the field of addictions and prevention and education with little kids right on up to adults since 1996-97. And once I read the language in this amendment, I was extremely concerned at how liberally it's been written and that it's more loosely written than the other states that have medical marijuana laws. And those are real easy to find if you need to look them up and see where they're at. I have seen families be destroyed and individuals become destroyed because of addiction. Now, there's that whole, oh, marijuana is not a gateway drug. Well, if it's not for you, then I'm really happy for you. But for everyone that I have seen in treatment, they didn't start off banging dope and snorting opiates. We said this last week. They started off with marijuana, alcohol, or tobacco, and I challenge each and every one of you that question that to go speak to an addict, go to a treatment center and find out. They didn't start off with those harder drugs, they started with weed. So congratulations to those that aren't considered addicted or have to go to treatment, but for the other ones, I'm really concerned. If you're for the legalization of marijuana and that's why you're here, then you're all for Amendment 2. If you are interested in the concept of medical marijuana, and I think some of the things that we've been discussing up here and researching more into this instead of looking at just the anecdotal stories, either mine or Mr. Rosenfeld's or the Jordans or other families, and actually getting to the meat of this and research this plant, then this is not the amendment for you because that's actually not what it's about, and that's why I was really upset and disturbed by the language that's in the amendment. I also want you to think about, too, that medical marijuana is really a ruse, and some of you guys are going to be really pleased because I'm going to reference some of those wonderful organizations that you support. National Organization of Reform of Marijuana Laws. In 1979, Keith Stroop said, "We will use medical marijuana as a red herring to give marijuana a good name." Just this year, Dan Lynn of NORML, again, National Organization of Reform of Marijuana Laws, said, "We've always known that there's a connection between schizophrenia and marijuana." So these are your people. This is NORML. This is Dan Lynn of NORML that has said this. You also have Aaron Houston from Students from Sensible Drug Policy a couple of years ago did a debate, and he said smoking pot is not healthy. We also had Dr. Gerdeman last week, who is on the Blue Ribbon Commission, said that's really not the best delivery method. So those are things to think about of who is actually behind this movement and reframing the thoughts of medical marijuana. It comes straight from the horse's mouths. So please look at the amendment and please notice that there are significant loopholes. Most disturbing for me is that in the first iteration of the amendment, they had something in there about minors. Now there's nothing in there. And it's important to understand that this is a constitutional amendment, and because there is no age restriction, which, by the way, we're the only state to put forth medical marijuana laws that has no age restriction, kids now have a constitutional right to go to a pot doc and get pot. Now, Mr. Morgan's writing notes, and I'm sure he's going to try to talk about how, well, parents have the ability to sign a parent and guardian consent form anytime you take your child to the doctor. There actually isn't a statute that requires that. We all, when we go there, sign that blindly form. It's not required. And so these unscrupulous doctors, when we are concerned about the pill mills that might be taking over these pot shops, we're concerned that they're going to prey on our kids because, unfortunately, there isn't a protection. And it is a constitutional amendment. Why was it not written in there? The only requirement for a caregiver is that you're 21. When I think of a caregiver, I think of a family member, a parent, a spouse, a loved one that knows that person's illness, disease, and understands how their drugs of choice or their pharmaceuticals work on them. They talk to the doctor, they talk to the pharmacist. The only requirement for this caregiver is that you're 21. You don't need a medical background, you don't have a background screening, and you don't even have to be related. That's outrageous to me. Another loophole that is in the language is the pot shops. We're afraid because we're going to come back to pill mills, call it fear-mongering, call it what you will, but There's no zoning or restrictions on that. And we can't rely or assume that the Department of Health is going to do that because, again, it's a constitutional amendment. Please remember that a yes vote on this is for forever. A no is for not right now. Please revisit this language. Please work with us. Please fix these issues, which I understand this Blue Ribbon Commission has come in to say that they will try to do. But again, it's a constitutional amendment. We are not able to make the changes to it now. We are voting on the language as it stands, and constitutional law supersedes all other state law and city and county laws. I hope I'm at my 5 minutes.
You are 4.5, so thank you. Before we move on, I would like to remind you that we want to be respectful to both speakers, so please, no applause, let them speak. I know a lot of you are really interested in what they have to say. Mr. Morgan, the floor is yours.
Well, thank you. It's good to be here. I have an irresistible urge every time I'm in front of a microphone and people to say, if you've been injured in an automobile accident, hurt on the job, or been hassled by the Osceola County Sheriff's Office, call John Morgan fighting for it. But just a joke. Just a joke. And I apologize for being late. I came by bus and there was a roadblock that did a little search and seizure in my bus, but all we had was Jack Daniels and vodka on the thing coming over here. It's always very intimidating when you debate a man who's wearing a gun. It's also very intimidating when he's got his SWAT team in the back with guns. So I'm not going to say anything bad about Grady Judd today. I can promise you that. He's not only a good man and a good sheriff, he's a great man and a great sheriff. Good people and reasonable people can disagree and not be mad at each other. They can just disagree, and that's all this is about. So, let me just tell you a couple of things. I'll do the short version. Why are we doing a constitutional amendment? It's real simple. We send these guys to Tallahassee to take care of their neighbors, to do the law. They wouldn't even have a hearing. They wouldn't even let somebody come and testify. They wouldn't, much less have a vote. They forced us to do this because they wouldn't do their job. They're more worried about their next election than their next door neighbor. And that's why we're having to do a constitutional amendment. As a result of the constitutional amendment, we forced their hand. The reason Charlotte's Web is the law in Florida is because we started this. Charlotte's Web is the law in children with epilepsy that are being unlocked from their prisons for life and their families get to know them for the first time, came from Amendment 2, came from our movement. And thank God for Senator Don Gates, our president of the Senate, who confessed that once upon a time when his dying friend in a hospice had no other way to go, he went out and bought marijuana and gave it to him illegally. You know why he did? Because Don Gates is a compassionate man and he loved his friend who died in that hospice. And I want to thank Representative Matt Gates for sponsoring Charlotte's Web, a law we have today. So, number 2, why medical marijuana? It's real simple. It works. I don't know why it works. I went to the University of Florida. I was in political science. I took one biology class and I knew I had no business going any further. I don't know why water works. I don't know why aloe works. I don't know why medical marijuana works. I just know it works. And it's not just anecdotal. We've got Irv here who's telling his story, but you can go to Israel, where for the last 50 years they have been studying. We can't study it here because it's a Schedule I drug. We can't study it here. But in Israel, for 50 years, miracles are happening every single day. Those stories are not anecdotal. Those are real. This fella here in the middle, I didn't catch his name, but he was talking about men getting breasts from smoking marijuana. I started worrying about it for a minute. He started talking about smokers getting coughs, and there was so much brain damage was one of them. Listen, brain injured. These are not my numbers. This is going to benefit about 300,000 or 400,000 men, women, and children in Florida. That's who's going to benefit. It's going to benefit people who are dying from ALS. Sir, they don't care about their breast. They care about their breath. They care about the last breath. It's people with multiple sclerosis who die a young death. It's cancer survivors, AIDS victims, children with epilepsy. You think they're worried? You think this little girl right over here, do you think they're worrying about damage to their lungs? Do you think that a man who's in a hospice center is worried about his breast being enlarged? I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Listen, Big Pharma has got a vested interest in this. They have paid guns all over the country. A guy works for Purdue Pharma. He's an expert. He goes around the country and says, vote no. You know why? Because they sell OxyContin. And they want to sell OxyContin, which is going to kill you, hook you, and destroy families. I don't know who's paying her. I don't know who she is. I don't know who's paying him. I don't know who he is. But I can tell you this, nobody's paying me. I can't be bought. I can't be bought. So thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Morgan. Sheriff John, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much for allowing me to be here. Now you see why you run such a successful law firm, don't you? You know, I had someone tell me today, they said, you know, I know you don't like that John Morgan. I said, no, just the opposite's true. I had a nephew that worked for him when he had a debilitating injury during a diving accident. First one at the hospital was John Morgan. The last one to leave was John Morgan. John Morgan is very special to me and my family, and he's a good man. He's a great man. We disagree on this issue, but I can tell you this, that as we go forward, and the pro-marijuana people call it medicine for the very ill, for only acute diseases such as cancer and ALS. They pull our heartstrings of the compassionate voters in Florida, and they said, you know, don't you want to help the very sick? And my response to that is absolutely, yes. So my question is, then why was the Constitutional Amendment 2 written like it was, full of loopholes? You know, when's the last time that you went to a doctor and your doctor said, here, take this medicine and go home and smoke it till you feel better? That's legitimate medicine. When's the last time your doctor said, don't go to the pharmacy to fill this prescription, go to the marijuana dispensary? Ladies and gentlemen, the nation spent billions of dollars educating the country about the health dangers of smoking cigarettes. And now we're supposed to think that smoking marijuana is healthy? Ladies and gentlemen, here's what I want to tell you. The Constitutional Amendment, as it's written, is full of loopholes. You heard the good doctor speak a minute. And that's what I'm concerned about. Loopholes such as a qualifying patient is a person. You're a person, I'm a person, a teenager's a person. When you look to see debilitating medical condition in the Constitutional Amendment, you can go, well, yeah, that sounds good to help those very sick. And then there's these special words that says, or other conditions that are not debilitating conditions at all, but it's leg cramps, can't sleep at night, backaches, stress, anxiety. Do those sound like debilitating diseases? Yeah, my backache's a debilitating disease, I can assure you. And I think you just answered your own question there. personal caregiver, 21 years of age, and that's all that's in the constitutional amendment. And then there's the one that really catches my interest. It's no civil liability for the physician that recommends marijuana. There's no personal responsibility or civil liability for the personal caregiver of the product. And the actions and conduct by the medical treatment center or its employees are exempt from medical liability. Ladies and gentlemen, every profession I know has civil liability if they fail to do what they're supposed to, except under Constitutional Amendment 2. If you operate within the confines of that, you're civilly and criminally immune. And they call it medicine. The average marijuana card holder in California is a 32-year-old male. Sounds like a real sick population to me. 94% of the medical marijuana card holders in Colorado had other conditions, not cancer, HIV, AIDS, ALS. You know, the thing that concerns me, and understand, I am sensitive. I am sensitive about the people that are very sick and need medicine. But when you look at the 50 states, the red is mostly at the very top. These are the highest use states of marijuana by kids 12 to 17 years of age, and the ones in red just happen to be states that have legalized medical marijuana. So as I look at this and I see that Colorado reports a 200% increase to children under 5, half of that is edibles. Half of it's edibles. And then I hear the police are going to stop making marijuana arrests. That's fiction. My prediction is they'll make more marijuana arrests. But as I close out tonight, I want you to know, I work for you. I'm going to do what you say. If you voted up in November, I'm going to salute and march on. If you voted no in November, then I'm not going to beat my chest and say, I told you so. I am your servant, but it's my job as your sheriff to say, beware of the consequences.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you all, and thanks for these just really incredible speakers tonight who have provided a lot of information and a lot to think about. So now we're going to get some questions that have been asked in advance. And the first one is for Mr. Morgan, and I'm reading these questions as they were submitted. So if I say I'm not talking about me, I'm talking about the person who wrote the question. It is my understanding that there is a list of diseases or illnesses that would qualify for use of medical marijuana, although the list ends with the words "or other conditions." What is to stop some physicians from selling prescriptions to anyone who wants them, much like some pain management clinics do now? Mr. Morgan?
Do you want to stand up or sit?
Either way.
Well, the short answer is nothing. But I'll tell you another question is, what is to stop a deputy sheriff from breaking the law? I read today in the paper where a deputy down in Orlando stole, listen, no. What's to sort of do it another way? What's to stop a lawyer from taking his client's money? What's to stop a rogue actor from doing anything bad? What's to stop a doctor from selling illegal pill mills? Nothing. But let me tell you what, I believe in doctors. I believe that 99% are good. I believe that they understand what the word debilitating means. They understand that that little girl in that wheelchair is debilitating. If you believe in doctors, and I do, if you believe that 99% are good, and I do, look, there's going to be crooks everywhere. You can't stop that. I guarantee you, Sheriff Judd has been surprised by some of the crooks that he never would have thought were crooks. But what we have to do is we have to trust our doctors. If you trust your doctor, trust them with this amendment.
Thank you. Okay, again, if we could hold our applause, we'll get through a lot more questions and you'll find a lot more information. Sheriff Judd, are law enforcement officials concerned about losing revenue if Amendment 2 passes? If medical marijuana is legalized, would it be harder for law enforcement agencies to seize property from pot sellers and sell it at auction?
You know, that's one of the questions that I have heard float around in the fiction is, you know, y'all just want to be able to arrest more people. That's why you do this. You just want to cost them money. Ladies and gentlemen, it may come as a shock to you, but our budget is not predicated on arrest. It's not predicated on seizures. Our budget's not created so that we can spend that operating money on cars. It's not created so we can spend it on capital equipment or operating equipment. It's not created so we can spend it on salaries. Yes, there's the forfeiture laws in the state of Florida. But the marijuana, as you're describing, as is described in Amendment 2, is a minuscule amount of what goes on every day. And I can tell you that our seizures of tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of dollars, our seizures of cars and all kinds of equipment are from trafficking amount of drugs. It's not from this stuff at all. It is minuscule. So for those who continue to perpetuate the fact that, oh yeah, y'all are just making money off of this, that's not true. But let me give you this last bit of information. The way this constitutional amendment is written, law enforcement will make more medical marijuana regulatory arrest if it passes than they currently make medical or make marijuana arrests today. There will be more charged, not less, because there's more opportunities to hiccup. Now you either have it or you don't. But if you have it improperly, you're driving down the road, most people take it home with them, but I can assure you from a lot of experience, if it passes with a lot of regulations, a lot of dotting the I's and crosses the T's, you'll see more arrests, not less.
Thank you. Okay, now we're going to go for one. Dr. Redout, we'll have you answer first, and then Dr. Sion. Is there any scientific evidence to support claims that marijuana has medical benefits?
The quick answer to that is an emphatic yes. I mean, it really does help a lot of different people. We have lots of studies from all over the world where it has helped various kinds of patients. It seems to be especially helpful in certain kinds of conditions. There are a lot of researchers out there that would like to be able to expand what they can do with it. They're finding all kinds of things, not only for the CB1 receptors, but for the CB2 receptors. There are things that it may be helpful for inflammatory diseases, as well as for the things that you already know, pain, anorexia, cancer, induced nausea and vomiting, rheumatoid arthritis, spasticity in multiple sclerosis, and epilepsy.
Thank you. Dr. Sion?
Well, first of all, I've been a doctor for 25 years, and I've treated thousands of people with, chronic, debilitating, fatal diseases. And until now, I didn't know I was a horrible person. I mean, I don't want to go against Mr. Morgan in a court of law because I feel terrible. I mean, I'm just I mean, his reputation is certainly well served. Marijuana is a drug, all right? So all drugs have negative and positive effects. So I mentioned the negative effects. There are certainly positive effects of marijuana. I mean, there are positive effects of Jack Daniels, all right? So if you have pain, if you drink Jack Daniels, your pain threshold is going to decrease. If you're an insomniac and you drink Jack Daniels, all right, you're going to get sleepy. It's a depressant. So the question is, it's not whether marijuana has any medical effects. The question is, do the positive effects outweigh the negative effects? And is it a safe modality? Is it a safe drug? All right? So, and is it superior to current medical therapy? The true question of that is we don't know. It hasn't been truly studied. All right? It's been a Schedule I drug. All right? That forbids any university, any research institution in the United States from studying it. The AMA position is it should be taken off a Schedule I drug and studied. That's a position of almost every single organized medical society in the United States. They all agree it should be studied. I mean, nobody disagrees with that. My concern, all right, is that to make a drug available without any significant research, all right, as to the impact of that drug is foolhardy. It's just silly. And people have already spoken about the problems with the actual amendment, how it's written, all right? And Mr. Morgan is right. 99% of the doctors are good doctors. But let me tell you, a few years ago, Florida was the #1 place in the United States that were prescribing OxyContin and narcotics. Nine out of the 10 most prescribed physicians were living in Florida, in the United States, okay? So you know what? You gotta worry about that 1%. You better worry about that 1%, because that 1% can cause a lot of problems. It can kill a lot of people. So we can't make it. We can't make decisions.
Please.
We cannot make public health policy decisions based on emotion, based on rhetoric, and based on anecdote. We have to base it on fact. In the U.S. court system, anecdote and emotion work.
Thank you,
But
Dr.
in science, it
Sio.
doesn't.
Mr. Rosenfeld, there's no approved form of medicine that is smoked, and we all know about the health hazards of cigarettes. How can smoked marijuana be considered a form of medicine?
Dr. Donald Tashkin, for 30 years, worked for the federal government to prove the negative aspects of marijuana on the human body. His one last study was a 10-year study to prove once and for all that marijuana caused lung cancer. He was sure of it. He did a 10-year study with over 10,000 patients in California. At the end of those 10 years, he stated that he could not find one case of lung cancer due to marijuana. What he also stated was this, that the people that smoked cigarettes and marijuana had less cancers than the people that just smoked cigarettes. Reason being, marijuana is a neuroprotectant for the lungs. Okay, but let's forget about smoking it, okay? There's other forms of ingestion. There's sublingual sprays that you spray into your tongue. There are vaporizers where you vaporize it. Okay, you can make butter, make edibles out of it. Okay, make tinctures out of it. But again, getting back to smoking, Kathy Jordan over there, who has ALS for 27 years, she mostly ingests her cannabis without smoking it. But in the mornings, she has to smoke it because ALS patients gather liquid in their lungs overnight. That's what ends up really killing them. So what the cannabis does is it's an irritant. It irritates the lungs so where she coughs up that liquid in the morning. So she's able to survive. So there is a benefit for smoked marijuana. And again, myself, I've smoked it. That's mainly 99% of what I do. I've smoked it for 43 years. The last time myself and the other 3 federal patients were tested for lung capacity, my lung capacity was 108% of normal. The other 3 federal patients were 100 to 105% of normal. So if you can say, well, you know, it harms everybody's lungs except for these 4 patients, well, that's not true, okay? So what, again, I try to say is, you know, I don't want to be the hysteria, the person that says, you know, it's not dangerous. It does have some problems to it. Okay, but lung damage is not one of those problems. It's that simple. Here I am standing in front of you and can document that I've smoked over 140,000 cannabis cigarettes provided by a federal government. Okay? So therefore, I'm living proof that it doesn't cause lung cancer. Now, they used to say that I'm the 85-year-old man that smokes 2 packs of cigarettes a day and didn't get lung cancer, therefore it doesn't cause lung cancer. But they tested the 4 of us federal patients. So when they are going to say now the only 4 patients that it doesn't harm are the 4 federal patients, I don't think so.
Thank you. Okay, Dr. Spencer, opponents say the phrase, quote, debilitating condition is vague and would allow doctors to give prescriptions to anyone for any ailment, such as headaches and all the things we talked about before. What should be done to ensure that doesn't happen if Amendment 2 passes?
I think we've already sort of addressed this actually in my opening statements, so I'll just reiterate that again, this is a constitutional amendment. We do not have any such statute that states that parents have to give consent for medical treatment. It's just kind of standard practice that we all sign those forms, and we usually sign even in the parent guardian line or patient line. So the problem when we start talking about regulations and, well, what can we do to ensure that that doesn't happen, the authors could have written it into the amendment, is how we could have ensured that. Because once you come back and try to regulate or restrict, you're open to litigation. So they're, at this point, again, when we go back to that 1% of doctors, how do we know that they're not going to recommend this? Because again, it's not a prescription to our kids. So I think we've already addressed it, and so just to be able to reiterate, that's good.
Thank you. Okay, Mr. Morgan, my understanding is that Florida already has a legal form of marijuana called Marinol for medical conditions. A medical provider has told me that Marinol makes the patient more comfortable without inducing a euphoria or high, and a law passed earlier this year allows the use of Charlotte's Web, another cannabis extract with no euphoric properties. So why do we need Amendment 2 and additional marijuana use?
Well, here's what we know for a fact. We know about Marinol. We know that Marinol is made by Big Pharma. We know that they know that it works, marijuana. They've just not been able to harness it in a capsule form. They've been trying for 40 years. They just can't do it. When you're nauseated, there's a nausea drug that just doesn't work. And so the reason we need it, as Irv talked about, there are many different strains. It's like asking the question, why do we need Xanax, Darvocet, Percocet, OxyContin, morphine, aspirin? Why do we need them all? Because they all do different things. Marijuana has all sorts of strains that do different things. For this little girl's epilepsy, it'll be an oil. For Irv, it's a smoke form. For others, it'll be butter and food. But the one thing we know for a fact is we know there's no studies in America because it's a Schedule I drug. There's plenty of studies in Israel. But we know this. We know for a fact that it works because they've made Marinol. The question is, are we going to wait another 30 or 40 years for the pharmaceutical companies to make billions of dollars when we have an herb, a plant put into nature for us by God that works? And finally, to the doctor in the middle, nobody's ever died from an overdose of marijuana of any type.
All right, Sheriff Judd, how will an officer be able to field test a person suspected of being under the influence of marijuana, and who will determine whether the person was smoking marijuana legally or not? If a person has a prescription, will that satisfy the courts?
First, for the person that asked that question, they won't have a prescription because doctors can't write prescriptions even under Constitutional Amendment 2. They'll have to have a recommendation. Second of all, law enforcement officers will make arrests for those intoxicated and operating a motor vehicle then like they do now. Simply, that's number one, they see the driving conduct. Then they stop the vehicle, ask the person to get out, and submit to some sobriety test. Once that's completed, then they can arrest them, take them in custody, and ask them to take a test, either a urinalysis or a blood test, to check for the presence of THC. Currently in Florida law, there is no nanogram level that establishes automatic intoxication like there is for alcohol at 0.08. So the criminal case for driving under the influence would be clearly made based upon the other investigations that we currently do. So none of that would change. And it's important to point out that this is all about keeping people safe. It's all about making sure that people aren't intoxicated and on the road driving regardless of what's in their system. And there is this fictional belief going around that if they pass Amendment 2 and I get my medical marijuana card and I'm stopped for DUI, I can show them my card and I can't be arrested. Oh, I hate to disappoint you. That's not the way that deal works, any more than if you get stopped, you break out a copy of your prescription from the other drug, or you show us a receipt from your alcohol. You know, I got this receipt where I legally bought it. I can't go to jail for this. So anyway, let me set the record clear on that. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Rosenfeld, this is a long kind of multi-part question. The amendment says caregivers would be allowed to assist patients' medical use of marijuana, and it says the Department of Health would issue ID cards to patients and caregivers. That sounds pretty vague. Will there be a screening process for patients and caregivers? Will caregivers with criminal records be able to obtain marijuana for their clients? And can a pimp of a 15-year-old runaway be considered a caregiver? What defines caregiver, and can you see why there is concern about how vague the language is?
Okay, I am part of the Blue Ribbon Committee, which is helping to write policy that we want to see go into effect November 5th after the ballot initiative is passed. Okay, I'm a federal patient. There's nobody more legal in this country than I am. So I am helping to set policy that we make sure that the patients are law-abiding and are legally allowed to possess a recommendation. We want to make sure that a caregiver has the same qualifications. Now, can somebody have a criminal record and still be a caregiver? Well, let's say 10 years ago they were arrested for buying marijuana from an undercover police officer. Then yes, I believe they would be allowed to. Now, let's say that same person committed second-degree murder and now is out of prison. No, they should not be allowed to have it. So what we want to make this, what I want to see, and that's why I'm on the Blue Ribbon Committee. And this committee, by the way, is made up of bipartisan. I mean, there are people on the committee that are working diligently to keep it from passing. But what they've said is this: while we don't want it to pass, and we're going to work as hard as we can, we want to make sure that if it does pass, we have the best rules and regulations in this country. And that's what I'm making sure of, because I'm a federal patient. If I'm putting my name onto this amendment, I want to make sure that I'm not going to be embarrassed. The federal government grows marijuana for me on the campus, University of Mississippi. They ship it to Raleigh, North Carolina, where it's freeze-dried and put in cigarette form. Now, we're not going to have the privilege of doing it that way, but we sure can set up policy to make sure that dispensaries are on the up and up. We can make sure that every plant that's being grown has a barcode, seed to sale, to watch where that plant goes from the day it was born to when it's sold, okay? And also, when it's sold, we're going to be able to equate that to how much money that dispensary took in, so they'll be able to take that money and deposit it into a bank to be able to show that it's not money laundering, okay? You know, I've helped so much in the country that I just want to make sure that if we pass this, that we have the best law possible to help the most people and to be compassionate, because that's what this is all about. If it wasn't for the patients, we wouldn't be here today.
Thank you. Dr. Spencer and then Dr. Sion, why is alcohol allowed by federal law but marijuana prohibited if marijuana is less dangerous for driving?
I always find this question really peculiar because I don't really understand why one intoxicating substance is better or worse than another intoxicating substance. So, I really don't understand the point of the question when it has to do with Amendment 2. So, it's not what this amendment is about. And when we increase access, when we increase access to drugs, we've already seen the increased use. So we are going to see more people on the road that are impaired, and I'm sure Dr. Sion is going to actually be able to address some of those issues.
Well, I don't think you can drive intoxicated in Polk County. So whether it's alcohol or anything else, does anybody seriously believe that marijuana or alcohol or any other drug, that the reason you take it is to get a psychogenic effect, doesn't affect you? I mean, that's the reason you're smoking it, right? You know why people drink? They drink because of its physiological effects, all right? There was a study done in the Journal of Aviation Space Environmental Medicine, and they took pilots. These are professional pilots, military pilots, and they had them smoke marijuana, and their performance was impaired when they flew a simulator for up to 24 hours. And almost all of them, except one of them, thought they did great. Imagine that they thought their performance was actually superior on marijuana subjectively than without it, when objectively it was not. There's also, in the British Journal of Psychiatry, a study that showed you had acute psychomotor impairment that interfered with the ability of people to operate machinery, which your motor skills are impaired. And this has to do with the way the drug works, where your judgment and cognitive abilities that are impaired wear off way before your motor skills. So you think you're okay, but you're actually not okay.
Thank you. Dr. Redout, is marijuana addictive in both physical and psychological ways?
What the science seems to tell us is that about 9% of people who use marijuana can develop a dependency to it that is both physical and psychological. Like all drugs of this type, pot exerts its influence in the midbrain reward center, triggering dopamine release in the prefrontal cortex. That's a nice way of saying that your brain likes the effect. The thing about it is that who seems to be at most risk for developing problems with marijuana, again, tends to be younger users. The younger the start of use, the worse that it is. Every researcher says, the best thing that you can do is try to prevent and limit first use. When people start smoking marijuana after age 25, the rate of dependency is almost zero. If people start smoking marijuana in their teens, the rate of dependency is about 1 in 6. So much higher that way. Still lower than just about any other drug out there, but that is addictive, but it's not insignificant.
Thank you. Mr. Rosenfeld, if Amendment 2 passes, will a medical doctor write a prescription for marijuana for his or her patients, and who will fill the prescription?
A doctor, a qualified physician in the state of Florida will give a recommendation, not a prescription. And that person will take the recommendation and go to a facility that's been licensed and checked over by the Department of Health. The medicine that dispenser will be giving out will be noted, okay? The state will know where that plant came from and when it was grown and how it's dispensed. So a doctor will only be able to write a recommendation, but again, the patient will be able to use that recommendation, go to an approved dispensary, and follow the law and not have to worry about possibly being arrested.
Thank you. Sheriff Judd, you have indicated that policing medical marijuana will be a challenge in determining who is in legal possession and who is not. That said, wouldn't complete decriminalization of amounts 1 ounce or less for any use with age restrictions be much simpler to police?
Seems like there are some people that like full legalization of marijuana here. Let me first off tell you, I'm against legalization of marijuana. That may come as a surprise to y'all. But the answer to that is yes. It would be much easier for my deputies to say, well, you've got 1 ounce or more and you're in violation of the law. You got 1 ounce or less, so you're okay. That would be easy. This medical marijuana amendment is going to have all kinds of unintended consequences and be exceptionally complicated to enforce. It's going to be exceptionally complicated for people to use it with a permit without getting in trouble. And the classic is someone is driving the car and we stop them for speeding and we say, ma'am, may we see your driver's license? Yes. I notice you've got marijuana on your front seat. Oh, yes, that's my husband's medical marijuana. Oh, that's good, but he's not in there. So guess what? Do you have a medical marijuana card? Well, no. Well, you're under arrest because you're doing a regulatory violation. So the answer is, it would be a lot easier to either vote it up or vote it down. But the pollsters know that the people of the state of Florida won't do that, and this is the segue into the ultimate, what the majority of the people, not the sick people. I recognize there's some sick people that see some anecdotal evidence here, but this is what the majority of the people that are pro-marijuana are after.
Thank you. Mr. Morgan, the amendment provides specific limitations of liability to the prescribing physicians, producers, sellers, and qualified users of this product. Can you explain how the liability limitation will not be used to enable the delivery of unsuitable and unjustified product to the marketplace?
Well, this has been an interesting journey for me because I just came from Daytona Beach, where I debated a doctor, and I've heard of doctors talk today, and they're very worried about the immunity that I've given doctors. I've never been accused of giving doctors a break. I mean, if these doctors want to be sued, God, I'll sue them. I mean, if that's what they want. But look, here's a simple answer to the question. It would have been much simpler and much better for all of us if this was done legislatively. There's no question about it. But when Kathy Jordan and Bob Jordan, two Republicans, I think, went to Tallahassee to testify, they told her no. They said, we don't even want to hear it. We don't even want to hear it. So we have an imperfect vehicle, which is a constitutional amendment. But that's the power of the Constitution, and the people are the power. And so now what we did, when we had to look at what we're going to do, we looked at states like Colorado and California, so we don't want that. So we did it a different way. We granted immunity because we don't want to be out here, even though, I'm in the liability business. We didn't want to be out here trying to make a case or money or off doctors who prescribe marijuana. And so the reason it had to be done this way is because it's a constitutional amendment. The most important thing to remember is this. The most important part is going to happen after we pass it, because we're going to pass it. And when we do, then it's going to go to Tallahassee, and there's going to be an enactment. And the state legislature and the state senates and the governor will be in charge of those enactments and those tweaks. So to all the doctors who are upset that I gave them immunity, I'm sorry. I won't next time. But to Kathy Jordan, whose voice was not heard in Tallahassee, her voice is being heard now, loud and clear.
Right. Thank you. We're going to keep going with a few more questions. If we can have brief answers, that would be appreciated. We'll get a couple more in. Dr. Spencer, vote no on 2 says that under Amendment 2, teens and children will be able to legally purchase pot without their parents' consent. Can you explain how that would happen?
I think this is another thing that I've already explained in my opening, but I'll just reiterate, and then I'll go into a little bit of what we've been hearing up here from some of the panelists about the important part is after we pass it, and the Department of Health and these regulations and restrictions. But what, again, is really important for people to understand is why were they not put in there beforehand if this was so, if we needed to do this, and this is such an imperfect vehicle. You can't come back with a blue ribbon committee and make these recommendations and restrictions to protect these kids that are going to be able to get this from that 1% of doctors, because it's a constitutional amendment. This is an extraordinarily hard concept for people to understand and grasp. It took me a while to get it, and I don't know if that's what they're hoping, but once you violate the spirit of the law, which is so loosely written, it's more loosely written than Colorado and California and every other medical marijuana state, then you're going to be litigated against because you did not provide me reasonable access to either my medicine or to open up a business, etc.
Thank you. Dr. Redout, what science exists to prove that marijuana is a, quote, gateway drug? If this is actually true, hold your laughs, isn't the Sports Illustrated swimsuit issue a gateway to all types of pornography? And isn't a water gun a gateway weapon to an assault rifle?
Let me just make a couple of quick points here. The evidence of gateway is really extremely weak. Actually, the biggest gateway drug appears to be tobacco, which seems to be implicated in every study that's done. If you look at a couple of things I wanted to make a point of, though. Several studies have been done about teenage use, the most vulnerable part of the population, including one that was just published last year from the University of Florida in the Journal of Public Health, and they studied adolescent pot use in states with and without marijuana, medical marijuana laws over an 8-year span, and they found there was no increase in adolescent use in those states when it was controlled for general fluctuations in use nationally. So that evidence is pretty strong. There was another study that was done in California in the Journal of Drug Issues back in 2004. They also found no increase in use among people 16 to 25. So that's a good thing. It still needs to be protected against. In terms of gateway, we look at a lot of it has to do with attitudes. If you look at the Netherlands, where pot is, you can get pot on the street corners. You can get little coffee shops there. What happens with teenagers from the Netherlands? They tend to use pot less than American kids, whether the American kids have access to pot or not. So it really has to do much more with attitudes at the local level.
Thank you. Dr. Cione and then Mr. Rosenfeld, does marijuana really treat pain symptoms of cancer?
Well, I mean, lots of things treats pain. And it doesn't really matter where you get the pain from. Pain is pain. So Tylenol treats pain, vodka can treat pain, and marijuana can modulate your pain centers. So the question is this really the best therapy? And the problem is it hasn't been thoroughly studied, all right? So that's the problem with the way the legislation, this amendment is written, and with the issue in general in the United States, that we really don't know how much of a drug to deliver. Does it really work in randomized control studies? That's unknown. And unfortunately, it's unknown because in 1970, the United States Congress made marijuana a Schedule I drug, which actually forbade anyone from studying it. So what I would agree that it would have to be studied, and we have to learn more about it. But I'll tell you about Marinol, okay? And I prescribe Marinol to cancer patients, to my lung cancer patients, because I'm a lung doctor. And I would tell you that it's not very effective, all right? So most people that I prescribe Marinol to decide not to take the drug, and it doesn't really work very well for their nausea. It doesn't work very well for their pain. And Marinol, the way Marinol came about, it's not a very effective drug. There was only one study done, okay? The study was very poorly done, and it was approved by the FDA because they saw basically no harm in using Marinol in terminally ill patients. But the effectiveness of Marinol is actually very poor. And most oncologists, most radiation oncologists, most people that deal with cancer every day realize that Marinol is not a very effective drug as far as pain control. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Rosenfeld?
Well, I'm, again, living proof I'm alive, so it does work. Now, again, we talk about Israel because that's where studies have come, and it does help the pain of cancer. But you know what it also does? It helps the pain of stopping the throwing up, okay, from the anti-nausea drugs that don't really work. It takes away the pain from the cancer patient smelling food in their house and it getting them nauseous, and the rest of the family feels bad about that. So this is what cannabis does. It works many different ways, and and that's why we allow physicians in the state of Florida to decide medical decisions, and that's all we want to do with this.
Thank you. Okay, our last two questions. Sheriff Judd, you have used California as an example to predict that if Amendment 2 passes, there will be at least 50 dispensaries in Polk County. Why do you think there will be so many, and how did you arrive at that figure? Do you know whether Florida's Department of Health will establish guidelines similar to those in California or go another route?
The pro-marijuana people are saying, yeah, that's great. Let me show you this. I just happen to have a chart with me. Imagine that. The Department of Health gave us the system by which to figure this out. Are you all ready? If you multiply the population of the county by 0.000928889, you end up with 57.029 medical marijuana dispensaries. We first started out saying there were 50, and the reason we did that is we took the population of Orange County, Orange County, California, divided into the number of medical marijuana dispensaries, and then we evaluated that based on our population. We came out with 50, Department of Health came out with 57. So ladies and gentlemen, at the end of the day, if we were talking about the very sick in this, only the very sick in this constitutional amendment, we wouldn't be here. My whole point is the constitutional amendment does much more than I believe the intent of the people who want to use marijuana strictly for significant diseases and pain. And that's why I'm concerned.
Thank you. Our last question is to Mr. Morgan. What is the reasoning behind specifying the establishment of medical marijuana distribution centers rather than directing that it be dispensed by licensed pharmacists like other regulated drugs?
Well, first of all, as far as dispensaries go, and again, we're only talking about 300,000 to 400,000 people in the state of Florida. If Polk County gets 57 dispensaries, I guess everybody's going to have their own personal dispensary in the state of Florida, as I extrapolate my numbers, but I'm not good in math either. The reason this is the way it has to be is, look, pharmacists know nothing about marijuana. It's a Schedule I drug. But people in Canada do, and people in Israel do, and people all over the world do. So the reason we have a dispensary is for people who know the most about it to help really sick people so that Kathy Jordan doesn't have to break the law when she goes to her dispensary. When you go to a pharmacy, you're there to get Xanax and pills and cold pills and everything else. It's apples and oranges. And the pharmacists do a great job, but the people who know this business and who know this science will absolutely, utterly amaze you, because there is a real science behind all this.
Thank you. We're going to move right into our closing statements from each panelist, and we're going to start with Mr. Morgan. I'm going to turn this over to you.
Well, thank you all for letting me be here. I want to thank my co-panelists on both sides and tell you why I did this. All of us have a reason to get involved in charities. I'm sure that Kathy Jordan is hoping everybody does an ice bucket challenge before the week is over and we help cure ALS. For me, this is about my brother Tim. My brother Tim was hurt when he was 18 years old, paralyzed from the neck down, C6, C7. The only time I've ever cried in front of Tim was the first time I went to see him when he was 18 years old and he was spinning on a gurney. I've probably cried 500 times plus about Tim since that time. His suffering is immeasurable. His loss of dignity has been unbelievable. If Tim was to survive without the marijuana he uses, he was up to 7 Xanax a day. That'll put down a horse. My brother Tim, the pain, as he describes it, starts in the tip of his toes and races to his brain, and it's like a brain freeze. If he feels it coming, he takes a hit of marijuana, it's gone. His spasms make his legs jump out of the chair. One hit of marijuana stops those spasms. The Jordans have met him. My brother Tim's suffering has been too much. This summer he called me, and he was in such bad shape. He said, "John, I think I'm going to die." This last Friday, He was at ORMC because he thought he was going to die again. And I said, Tim, why didn't you take a hit of the marijuana? And he said, I was asleep. He's in real bad shape. This stuff works, and I've seen it, and I know it. For all of you who don't have an illness or an affliction or a disease, God bless you. But one day you're going to, or somebody close as you're going to, and this is going to be here for you. And it's going to be here for you, and I'll tell you why. Because you're not scared of marijuana. You know it works. You know the truth. And at the end of the day, the reason I'm confident it's going to work and it's going to pass is because the people of Florida are compassionate. The people of Florida are smart. Multiple sclerosis doesn't pick political parties. AIDS doesn't pick Democrats or Republicans or independent. It just picks people. This is the moment of our lifetime in Florida to do something where we don't have to rely on politicians. We can just rely on ourselves to go back and to go out and, for God's sake, vote. And vote for compassion. And when you do it for the people.
Thank you, Mr. Morgan. Sheriff Judd?
You know, as I close today, my heart breaks for John's brother and the other people that are very, very sick. And ladies and gentlemen, if we were here today talking about marijuana to treat those that are very sick and diseased, well, actually, we wouldn't be here. I don't know anybody that's not compassionate and doesn't want that. Amendment 2 in its current form worries me. Quite frankly, ladies and gentlemen, here's what's been going around in the newspapers this week in Polk County. Quote, like it or not, ladies and gentlemen, medical marijuana is like a speeding out of control train, which is coming to a state, to a county, to a city, to a town, to a school, to a church near you, and you can't stop it. Ladies and gentlemen, that's not my quote. That's the pro-marijuana people's quote. And I can tell you where it happened. Sunday morning in a church in Lake Wells, where the people that are preparing to grow marijuana stood up and said that in church. Ben Pallara, United for Care, bragged this week in the paper that Amendment 2 passage will preempt Florida law against drug paraphernalia, such as bongs. Now, ladies and gentlemen, I didn't hear one word about the very sick, about the very diseased, about the folks whose all of our heart breaks for. I'm with you. I'm with you that we want to do everything we can for them. I understand John's position when he says, hey, we depended on the legislature and they didn't get it done. Well, you guessed right that they didn't get it done until this year. But ladies and gentlemen, what I'm talking about is Amendment 2 in its current form and the unintended consequences. What I'm talking about is the multiple loopholes that's going to create de facto legalization. It's not just going to help those that are very sick. The devil and the unintended consequences are in the details, and that's what I'm concerned about. And I close with this. If you went down to a used car lot and you said, hey, I'd like to buy this car. And they said, no, yeah, I want to sell it to you. Just sign the papers. No, I'd like to look under the hood. I'd like to test drive it. I'd like to look in the trunk. They said, hey, don't worry about that. We got a mechanic in the back. Sign the papers and buy it. And we'll fix it later. That's what they're asking you to do with Amendment 2. They're asking you to vote for it. And then we'll fix it later. Ladies and gentlemen, understand my heart. I'm for those that are very sick. But I'm concerned about the loopholes in Amendment 2. And at the end of the day, I work for you. I'm here to educate. How you vote, I'm going to support. You vote it up, I'm a good soldier. You vote it down, I'm not going to brag and beat my chest. Thank you.
Thank you, Sheriff. Mr. Rosenfeld?
I want to thank the Lakeland Ledger for putting on this panel. I appreciate you all being here on both sides of the table. And like I said before, I'm the only one on this panel that's actually ever used the substance. Okay? And I think that I've been very successful in proving that for 43-year use, 32 under the federal government, that this works. And I've seen patients nationwide in other states that have passed laws and seen it help them. So while there may not be a perfect bill or a perfect law, this is what we can build on. Now, I love this. This format was nice, but you know something? I think we need more. And I'd like to take tonight to challenge, and the public to see this, to challenge Sheriff Grady Judd, a Calvina Fay, a Mel or Betty Sembler, or anybody from Drug Free America or Save Our Society on Drugs. I'd like to challenge them to a half-hour or a one-hour debate that could be shown statewide. Okay? I think we owe that. I think we owe that to the people, to really bring it out to where we can make a debate, because when Sheriff Judd says something, I can't answer it. When I say something, he can't answer it. And so I really think that, again, we're all logical people, okay? None of us are, we're all intelligent. We all have our own beliefs, okay? But the bottom line is we want what's best for the people and what's best for Florida. And I believe that this amendment is what's best for the patients and what is best for Florida. So I'm hoping that they'll take me up on the challenge, because if they're so sure of their position, then what are they afraid of? Okay? So therefore, Sheriff, I make you that challenge. Bring your heavy hitters in. Bring a Calvina Fay. Bring a Betty and Mel Sembler. And if you want me to do it by myself, I'll be glad to do it by myself.
I want John to come.
I'd love John to be there too. I'd love John to be there too. But the point is that, again, I'm the type of person that is a patient, and it's real. So therefore, I could handle it if I have to by myself. Thank you.
Thank you. Dr. Sion?
What I would say is to Mr. Rosenfeld, I'm not sure he's the only one who's used marijuana on the panel. That's all I'm going to say. I'm not going to say anything else. And I don't want to get in any trouble. I mean, it's been implied and it's been said that marijuana is this cure-all drug for all these diseases and all these disorders. And what I would submit to the people of Polk County and the people of Florida is, do you really think that physicians who see devastating disease, incredible pain and suffering, do you really think that the million physicians in this country would keep a medication, a drug, a therapy, withheld it if they knew it was going to work? Do you think every single university in this country is going to withhold it?
Please, audience.
That's just not true. And the evidence is not clear. It's not to say that marijuana doesn't have some positive effects, but the problem is it has not been fully studied. We really don't know. And you can't base public health policy and public policy based on anecdotes. I mean, we can talk about Laetrile. We can talk about thalidomide in the 1960s. We can talk about all these drugs that have caused devastating problems. People have suffered from these drugs and from these medications that were used. We have to be sure. We have to be absolutely sure that what we do is correct, is medically correct, that actually will help people. And the way this proposal was written, the way this constitutional amendment is written, it's too broad, too vague, too nonspecific, and it's going to cause a lot of unintended consequences. We have to think about this. We have to do this correctly. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Dr. Redout?
So is there anybody out there who had their opinion that changed from when they walked in here to now? Anybody change their opinion? Yeah, I didn't think so. I like Dr. Sion, I feel like, I identify myself as kind of a science nerd. And so I like evidence. I like scientific evidence. And he is absolutely right that more studies need to be done and that this can be much more thoroughly explored. On the other hand, he's not correct when he says that there's only anecdotal evidence. There's a lot of anecdotal evidence, but there are also controlled, randomized scientific studies of the type that would normally be done for drugs like this. Does a lot more need to be done? Absolutely. We like to have, when drugs come to market, they usually have, thousands of subjects. Well, maybe in the aggregate there have been thousands of subjects in various different kinds of studies, but it's difficult when you want to have something that really has the type of solid backing with a lot of different people, a lot of different studies, a lot of different researchers, and the problem here is mainly that it's Schedule I. And so I am hoping that Grady has said before that this amendment is a Trojan horse, and I hope that it is. I hope that it's a Trojan horse that helps tip the federal level to stop marijuana being a Schedule I drug so it can get the type of study that it needs. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Redout. And Dr. Spencer?
It's going to be fun being the last one. I think this is most difficult because all of us on this panel, and I believe everyone in this audience is compassionate, and I think everyone on this panel has a compelling argument, a compelling story, a compelling whatever it may be. Yet somehow, if we notice in this room, civility gets lost. And Jody, wherever you are, we were just talking about this earlier, Jody James from Florida Can, and it's really sad to me that we can't all just sit here and without being vitriolic or yelling and stuff, we can't just sit down and have a true conversation because, again, it really does come back to compassion, and it comes back to science, and it comes back to doctors, and it comes back to all of us as citizens and caring individuals. And so, Irv, I have a challenge too, actually, and my challenge is for everyone in this room to read the amendment. Not that neatly packaged ballot summary that none of us in this room would argue with, not any of us. I think Sheriff Judd has exemplified that as well. But please read the amendment. I always have copies with me. You can find it on Ballotpedia. Actually, Mr. Morgan, I'm sure you can find it somewhere on one of their websites that you can read the entire amendment. Educate yourselves. I think all of us up here, we have compelling and passionate arguments for this, but it is up to us as the voters to get out there and be educated on it. Please read the amendment. Understand what we've been talking about on this side about the loopholes that are in there. Understand our concerns as to why it's so loosely written if we really were truly up here to talk about the medicinal benefits of this plant that I don't think any of us up here are denying or saying aren't there, but we need research. I'm asking all of you to do that before you either submit your absentee ballot or vote in November on November 4th. Please read it. Please identify the loopholes. If you have any questions, I'm sure you can contact either my office or Mr. Morgan's office, and we'd be more than happy to have that dialogue and good discussion with you. Thanks.
Thank you. Okay, now you can applaud our wonderful panelists.